Mark Kimmitt, he's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense serving under President George W. Bush. And from Washington, Joe Macaron, he is a resident fellow at the Arab Center. Thanks both so much for joining us. Let me just start in the studio. Thanks for coming. You know, Saudi is going to be pretty happy if Trump stays in office because Trump really doesn't mind if MBS is liability of sorts. But, you know, if the Democrats win and, you know, human rights issues, for example, start to carry a little more weight, what could change for Riyadh?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, there probably will be more scrutiny on the weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. We've seen what's happened with the Saudi use of advanced precision weaponry down in the war on Yemen. That's offended a lot of the people in the Biden camp. So I think that would be the first area. Second, of course, there's this outstanding question about the ongoing trial of the Khashoggi assassins. I think the United States will probably put more pressure on Saudi Arabia for a wider investigation. So I think those would probably be but at the same time, I would expect that either the Trump or the Biden administration will continue to press for using Saudi Arabia as the largest country in the Gulf to potentially open up relationships with Israel. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask Joe, I mean, there is potential here for the Saudi-U.S. relationship to almost flip 180 degrees, especially with Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, if we look at Trump's deal of the century, getting Saudi on board would have been a given, pretty much, I think if Trump continues in power. If not, the U.S., first of all, would likely drop that Middle East peace plan. And Saudi could really, do you think they could become more alienated? Let's put it that way.
I think there's a couple of factors here. First, if Biden is elected, we will go back somehow to the institutional relation between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. It will not be only on the late text messages between Kushner and MBS or the more casual relation that's going on. I think we go back into more institutional relation. The second component, I think Biden administration will try to balance pressuring Saudi Arabia on some issues important for the left and for the democratic base, but at the same time keeping Saudi Arabia within reach in this bilateral relation. It's going to be difficult to. There's one thing I think that Saudi care about is about what will happen with the Iran nuclear deal. But if Biden is elected also, pressure on Saudi Arabia to make a peace or normalization with Israel will tone down more or less. So I think there's many factors going on that might impact this relation.
It is. I mean, this is pivotal. The choice that American voters make for relationships. You mentioned, Joe, Iran. You know, Trump has been particularly antagonistic with Iranian leaders. Where would that relationship go if he stays in power or if Joe Biden takes over?
I think if Trump is re-elected, I think he will try to push for some negotiation with Iran. He might be resisted by his team, whether Pompeo or others, but I think he will be has his instinct to go for the deal with Iran at some point. And also Israel and some Arab allies will be more reserved. Otherwise, the maximum pressure on Iran, I think we'll start to see some retaliation from Iran. They will not wait for another 4 years without some retaliation in Iraq, in Lebanon, or somewhere else. If Biden is elected, he will try, I think, to go back to the deal, but he will have to take into consideration the Trump precondition, which is the ballistic missile and talking with Iran about its regional role. I think he will have to take into consideration the ceiling that Trump put somehow in the negotiation, because Congress might be more critical of Biden, given that there's already sanctions now in place. So if Biden was a little bit weak on this issue, Congress will pressure him.
Okay. One more question for both of you. Key, you know, to really relationships with the Muslim world in particular is Turkey.
Yep.
Joe Biden doesn't have the best record really on a strong relationship with Turkey. He's said things that have severely offended many Turks, and particularly this government, specifically on allying the United States with the PKK and YPG in Syria. Do you think Biden could change his mind? Has he been well advised?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that fundamental to the Biden campaign is the notion of rebuilding alliances. Probably the most important alliance in this region for Joe Biden and his team would be that of NATO. I would suspect that he would work with NATO to try to bring all 27 countries back together. Turkey has been very vital to the NATO relationship over the years, and I would expect that trying to isolate Turkey within NATO would not be where he would go. Yes, let's acknowledge it. The Kurds have a very, very strong lobby inside of Washington, D.C. But unless we get some people back into the government like Brett McGurk, I think that this relationship will be improved, whether it's with Biden or with President Trump. It's too important of a relationship to continue to allow to go south.
Okay, Joe, your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. It's safe to say that relation between Trump and Erdogan will be less smooth than it is with Trump and Erdogan. But it's inevitable to have some talks between both sides to contain their relation. I think the U.S. needs to have Turkey close enough. There need to cooperation in Syria and other places. I think it's going to be a difficult road ahead, but I think both sides need to talk. And Biden, I think the administration will be more keen to manage those differences.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to give you the last word. Thank you both, though, so much for joining us on this edition of the NewsHour. We're going to